You have to turn your volume up. Can you hear us, Ms. Lundgren? I can't hear her, but
She seems to be assenting that she can hear us.
sounds good. Right. Okay, on the record, in the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus Kathleen Burden, Amy Fascinello, John Haggard, Marianne Henry, Michelle Lundgren, and Michonne Madden. Council appearances.
Good morning, Lieutenant Logan on behalf of the people. Good morning, Kayla Crino on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mary Chartier on behalf of John Haggard, who is seated to my right.
Good morning, Your Honor. Lizzie Saylor, paralegal with Ms. Chartier.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nicholas Somberg on behalf of Michonne Mehta.
Good morning, Your Honor. George Brown on behalf of Marianne Henry, who sits to my left.
Good morning, Your Honor. Paul Staplin appearing on behalf and with Ms. Fascinello, who is seated.
Good morning, Your Honor. Gary Coder on behalf of Captain Burden.
Good morning, Your Honor. George Dominion, also on behalf of Captain. Good morning, Your Honor. Brian Silverbrun on behalf of Michelle Lundgren, who I see is appearing on screen from Zoom.
Okay, today was the date and time set to proceed with the defense witnesses. I do need to address an issue, you can be seated, address an issue regarding a concern that was presented to the court or to the administration. Although the court does have a policy whereby you can have your personal cell phones out during a proceeding, at no time should photos be taken of witnesses, nor should there be Facebook or other public posts made with commentary about that testimony, especially disparaging comments. That's a contemptible issue. It also can teeter or be found to be consistent with witness intimidation, which is a offense that could be charged criminally. And so the court's going to have to address the issue that was presented to the court, and those parties will get a hearing notice at a later time. But I'm advising everyone, especially those in the gallery, if I see your phones out and it doesn't appear, because if you're texting, your phone should be down. But if it appears that you're taking a photo, I'm going to have to take your phone and have it searched, because we're not going to have witnesses being intimidated when they're coming in here under a subpoena to give testimony. Nor will I have to be taking time away from my judicial duties to address commentary made on Facebook posts. It's juvenile and it's ridiculous. There are multiple defendants in this case being charged with felonies, and let's take it seriously and conduct ourselves as such. Unless there's any other preliminary matters that need to be addressed, we can call our first witness.
There are no preliminary matters from Mr. Haggard. I believe it's the cross-examination of Agent Shock at this time.
Is there any other preliminary matters from any other defense attorney?
None from Kathy Burden.
Michelle Lundgren, Your Honor.
No.
Thank you. You can take the stand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
You can have a seat. Counsel, you can proceed.
Thank you. Agent Shock, you've been here. I know it's unusual. You've got to look at me this
That's
way.
okay.
Just a few basics. It's been a few weeks since we've been here. You had indicated you started the investigation into this matter on or about December 28, 2022.
Yes.
And was the Attorney General's office involved with investigating this matter before you got involved?
Yes.
Who was that? Who was involved in that?
Agent Cronin, Scott Cronin.
How long had Agent Cronin been investigating the matter before you got involved?
I would have to refer to my notes on that.
Do you think it was, can you give us a roundabout, a year and a half?
I can say that it was more than a month, but I can't be certain beyond that.
So because I'm wondering what was the delay between December 2020 and then December 28, 2022, or when Agent Cronin started, which would have been approximately a month prior, you indicated?
I understand, what you're saying, I don't know what the delay was.
So, to your knowledge, Agent Cronin began investigating roughly a month, could be two, before you got involved, correct?
Yes, but I will say that Agent Cronin was also, there was a new position that opened up that he submitted for, and he was transferred to a new position. I do know that.
To your knowledge, there was no investigation in 2021 by the Attorney General's office.
To my knowledge, yes, you're right.
And then it was Agent Cronin who kicked off the investigation in sort of the latter part of 2022.
That's my understanding.
Did the Attorney General's office work with any other agencies, the FBI, Secret Service, anything like that, when it comes to the investigation portion?
Are you referring to my investigation?
Well,
or-
the Attorney General's investigation. So you're an agent of the Attorney General. I'm asking you about the investigation at your organization.
Okay, and I can only speak on my experience. So I did, during my investigation, I did reach out to other agencies for assistance.
What other agencies can you recall?
The FBI, the national, there's an investigative department with the National Archives, the state police. Those are some that I can remember off the top of my head.
So you weren't just a one-person investigator. You at least reached out to other organizations or individuals when you believed you needed the help.
Yes.
And then, were there other agents other than Agent Cronin who worked with you at the Attorney General's office on this matter?
Yes.
Who are they?
Special Agent Eduardo Torres and Special Agent Robert Lalone also assisted.
Thank you. Now, the affidavit in support of the complaint that you prepared, did anyone assist you in preparing this document?
Are you referring to, there was many affidavits?
Sure.
Are you talking about the warrant affidavit, the
This is-
complaint warrant subpoena?
Yes, and I can show it to you if need be, if that will help you refresh your memory.
Yeah, I think. Let me just look through all the pages here. Yes, I prepared the affidavit, up to number 37.
And then who prepared after number 37?
I don't want to assume, but it goes back, once I prepare it, it goes back for review to my supervisor and then to the AAGs, so
So who is your, may I take that back?
Yes,
Unless
of
you
cour-
need-
of
okay,
course,
Right.
yep.
So who was your supervisor who reviewed it?
Sam Miller.
And then who were the AAGs who were working on the case who would have reviewed it?
At the time, Assistant Attorney General LaDonna Logan, I believe it was Caleb Crino, and I'm not sure if Aaron Van Langeveldy would have had a review over that as well. But it goes off, those are the Assistant Attorney Generals that are reviewing the material that I prepare at that time. But as far as the transition, when Assistant Attorney General Crino came on, I don't remember the exact date.
Sure. And you mentioned Assistant Attorney General Van Lagerveld, and maybe mispronouncing his name, but forget it, you know who I
Aaron.
mean. Right. Well, I don't know him well, so I'm not gonna call him Aaron.
Okay.
But so was he involved in the investigation portion, or essentially do you work in a bubble and then pass the information along, or are assistant attorney generals giving you guidance as to, for example, things they'd like you to follow up on?
No, I work in a manner that, as far as the investigation goes, that it's independent. I will submit things for review, periodically, such as affidavits for search warrants and stuff like that. The process is, like I said, the documents are submitted to review first to my supervisor, and then once he approves, then it goes to all two or three of them at the time. As far as what they do on their end, they review it over. They may have some questions or concerns about certain things, maybe punctuation and grammar. It's always good to have a second set of eyes on it.
Now, when I'm looking at 1 through 37, you prepared. So when you're citing, for example, statutes as it relates to Michigan election law, and also there are some statutes here for federal law, that is all from your work. No one is giving you that guidance.
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. And then is this your first election law case, or you had experience doing that before?
This is my first election.
Okay. How did you just do that independent research yourself on what statutes you believe were applicable?
Yes.
Were you familiar at all with the Indian County Prosecutor's Memorandum on the conduct of the Republican electors?
I'm aware of it, yes.
Well, let me just ask you this, have you ever reviewed it?
Yes.
And did you review it before you drafted this affidavit?
Yes. I likely reviewed it sometime at the beginning of the investigation.
Did you reach, that was, and you can correct me if you don't remember, that was prepared by an assistant prosecuting attorney and submitted to the elected prosecutor and another assistant prosecuting attorney. Did you interview any of those individuals as to their thoughts about the memorandum that they prepared?
I did not interview them. I don't know the process of how they shared it. I just reviewed the document. It's simply put, I reviewed the document. I did not interview.
You'd agree with me, though, it was prepared by an assistant prosecuting attorney?
Yes, it was written. I think that's who authored it. I don't remember the name of that attorney.
Sure. Andrew Stevens, just for the record.
Okay.
Okay. Now, did you work full-time on the investigation, or are you also involved in other matters that you're also investigating?
No, I'm involved in other matters that I'm investigating.
What portion of your time, percentage-wise, do you think was dedicated to this matter?
This took up the bulk of my time.
Bulk meaning 80%?
I would say probably 60 to 70% of that time.
How many people do you think you interviewed?
Gosh, I couldn't give you an accurate number off of the top of my head without referring to my notes.
Over 100, do you think?
I know that there was well over 100 reports written. I don't know. I want to be as accurate as possible.
Would you agree with me that it's a large number of people being interviewed?
Yes.
And did you watch any news reports or media reports about the election and what electors were doing around the country? And by electors, I mean Republican electors.
I looked at media reports specific to this case.
Are you aware that there was a lot of media coverage about the election?
Yes.
And are you aware that there was a lot of media coverage with people having concerns about the election not being above board and being potentially fraudulent?
Yes.
Did you also look, and I believe you did based on your testimony, at the social media that the electors were, at the electors' social media?
Yes.
Now, when you were investigating this case, you interviewed Kenneth Chesbrough, correct?
Yes.
And he was interviewed pursuant to an immunity agreement?
I can't speak about the agreement, but I did interview him.
Was it a proffer agreement?
A
proffer agreement?
proffer agreement,
Okay.
yes.
And Mr. Chesbrough, to your recollection, talked about the involvement of himself in this process, correct?
Yes.
In terms of drafting documents.
Yes.
And Mr. Chesbrough is a lawyer, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Chesbrough expressed his confidence that this was a legitimate process.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
it goes to the effect on the listener and why we're actually here and what was done in the investigation.
It's gonna be enough for the members.
No, Your Honor.
Object to only.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm paraphrasing Mr. Chesbro's lengthy interview and emails that he submitted. But is it fair to say that Mr. Chesbro, when he was interviewed, talked about he believed this was a legitimate, lawful process that the electors were involved in?
Yes.
And he was involved to make sure that it was a legitimate, lawful process that the electors were involved in?
That I can't answer as far as he believed he was involved for that.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for him.
Sure. So, Mr. Chesbro told you, he's a lawyer, right?
Yes.
That he thought this was a legitimate, lawful process that the electors were involved in, correct?
Yes.
And then you also learned that other lawyers were involved in this process, right?
Yes.
What lawyers did you learn about?
There was Sean Flynn, Stu Sandler. Sean Flynn was the Trump campaign aide. He was an attorney. Stu Sandler. He's the Michigan GOP attorney. I would have to refer to my notes. I don't. There's some attorneys that were on the peripherals as well, so I'm not sure if you're talking about that. But as far as the process, I listed two. I would have to refer to my notes about the others.
Ian Norton, right?
He was again. That's where I was going.
Sure.
He's on the peripheral.
Okay.
He's an attorney.
What do you
That's
mean
my
by?
understanding.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by attorneys on the peripheral?
So he was at the Capitol that day as an attorney. What he was, if he was associated with the Trump campaign, the Michigan GOP, he didn't agree to an interview. So I didn't get to speak to him about that.
But he was on the Capitol on the day that that document was signed. And by that document, I mean this signed by the electors, right?
Yes.
That seems to me to be more involved than just on the peripheral. So what other lawyers do you believe were involved on the peripheral?
So I can't answer that because
Okay.
just off the top of my head, your first question was getting to the lawyers that were involved in the process. So I know that Ken Chesbro had drafted some documents. He was had sat down for an interview. I spoke to him directly about that. I know through other eyewitness accounts that Sean Flynn was involved. He is an attorney. I researched to determine that. As far as the others go, I'd have to refer to my notes or look at statements where people suggested that specific attorneys were involved in A, B, and C.
Going back to this affidavit in support of a complaint, are you the one who takes this to the court to have it signed off?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear on the process. You draft it, it goes to your supervisor to review it.
Yes.
Then it goes to lawyers.
Yes.
And then lawyers, meaning the assistant attorney generals, they make whatever changes they need to or add things to it, right?
They could. But go ahead,
Oh,
continue.
sure. Well, so, because you said you drafted through 37,
Right.
and this goes through paragraph 45. So someone added 38 to 45, correct?
Yeah.
And it wasn't you.
No.
It could have been your supervisor, or it could have been an assistant attorney general, correct?
It wouldn't have been my supervisor because he would have communicated that directly with me.
Okay. So some assistant attorney general, added paragraphs 38 to 45, right?
Yes.
And then you took this to the court, swore to it, and got it signed.
Yes.
The social media that you reviewed, well, let me jump back before. You had testified on direct that, and I know this was a couple of months ago, but you had no evidence of judicial action as it related to the 2020 election. Do you remember saying that? Or something like that?
Something like that.
What did you mean by that?
So specifically at that time period, so meaning December 14th, I didn't have any evidence of that as they're going in to vote during this time period.
But you were aware there were lawsuits pending, correct?
I was not aware of the, I mean, as we spoke about earlier, this was a national event, and so there were 6 or 7 states involved. So there may have been lawsuits out there. For me to look at every single court across the nation would be quite difficult. So I'm just speaking about the information that I was aware of at the time, and I didn't have that.
And even courts in Michigan, right? You didn't check every court in Michigan to see any pending lawsuit, correct?
Correct.
So as you sit here, you might not have been aware of it, but you don't know if any existed, correct?
Right. So that I'm speaking about what I was aware of.
Right. And then when it came to social media that you reviewed the social media of the Republican electors, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm wrong, to make sure essentially to see what people were thinking, what they were posting about their actions, to try and get at some idea of what people's intent was. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And you presented a significant portion of that when we were here the last time in court. I think there were tens of thousands of pages of people's social media. Even if it's not all applicable, it was still presented, right?
Yes.
And then you even read some of it out in the court about what people were thinking, or at least saying about what happened, correct?
Yes.
And that's because you think that that may be valuable information for the court to know in order to make a determination on this case, right?
Yes.
Now, the Attorney General in this case is Dana Nessel, correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that she made comments on September 18th, 2022, that the electors in this case were brainwashed?
Objection, Your Honor, the court is pleased to make a ruling that that was inadmissible in this exam.
Not me. I mean, no, I was involved in it.
Your Honor, I didn't even hear what she said.
She's making a question about statements made by Dana Nessel. I recall there being a motion to dismiss based on that. I don't recall a motion to eliminate.
I believe the court in the ruling denying the dismissal said that those statements were not admissible or relevant to
They
these
weren't
proceedings.
relevant, so if your objection is relevant, that's still.
Relevance and hearsay.
May I, Your Honor? I believe the motion to dismiss was filed by Mr. Brown as it relates to Ms. Henry. We did not join in that. They're not offered for the truth of the matter asserted. I don't think that Attorney General Nessel can know if somebody's been brainwashed or not. But it does go to a timeline of this investigation, which I believe is relevant, and I can make an offer of proof if the court would like.
But yet you can explain how this is relevant.
Yes, so Mr. Renner, who testified at our last time that we were in court, was interviewed on September 12th, 2023. And Mr. Renner made a number of comments, but including essentially that in his opinion, individuals, this is what he actually testified to, the electors were conscientious individuals attempting to do the right thing. And that they were told this was an appropriate process. And again, I'm paraphrasing his testimony and his interview. Then on September 18th, and I said 2022, I meant 2023. Mr. Renner is interviewed on September 12th, 2023. Dana Nessel makes her statement that the individuals, the Republican electors, genuinely believe Mr. Trump won the election. And they legitimately believe it, that they were brainwashed, they couldn't plead guilty because they really believed what they did was right. And she makes that on September 18th, 2023. And it's actually recorded. So it's not a private comment. And I'm curious if Mr. Renner's statement was shared with Attorney General Nessel, and that may have been a prompt for the statements that she publicly made about the mindset of the Republican electors. And I believe that is relevant because for an Attorney General to make a statement as it goes to intent, which is contrary to what her office charged, what prompted that statement I think is significant, and I do think it's significant to ask Agent Chalk because he was involved in the Renner interview on September 12th, 2023.
Your Honor, that calls for speculation to say that the Attorney General's comments were predicated upon hearing this information, and that's why she made the comments. This witness cannot testify to that.
I don't know if that was her question. If I think she's just trying to establish a timeline, first. The other issue is this is a statement made by the Attorney General, and she's questioning an employee of Attorney General about him drafting an affidavit to charge
Yes,
these individuals.
and the affidavit was drafted in July of 2023.
I think she's trying to, but I think her goal is to try to establish a timeline. For that purposes, I'm gonna overrule the objection and allow you to ask.
Thank you. So Agent Chalk, we'll walk back.
Yes.
We'll walk back. I know there was a lot of you on the group. You were involved in the interview of James Renner on September 12th, 2023, correct?
Yes.
And in that interview, Mr. Renner shared his belief that the individuals involved, and again, I'm paraphrasing, were conscientious individuals attempting to do the right thing.
I would have to refer to the report to specifically recall what Mr. Renner said.
Well, did Mr. Renner indicate that he believed this was a legitimate process that the electors were involved in?
Again, I would have to refer to the notes of the.
I have the report
Yeah,
right here.
that would be helpful, thank you. Is there a specific paragraph or?
He talks here. Okay.
So, based on a review of my report, it was his belief that he believed that Donald Trump may have the ability to run.
Okay. And did Mr. Renner say anything in that interview, and granted it is recorded, to indicate that he genuinely believed that this was an appropriate process that he was involved in?
I would have to review that.
Well, let me ask you this. After Mr. Renner gave his interview to the Attorney General's office, he was given an immunity from prosecution, correct?
Well, I found that out later, of course, but yes.
And that was in October of 2023, roughly. That sound about right?
It's probably, yeah. I don't have the specifics. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there was hundreds of reports
Sure.
written. That's why I'm asking to reference this report as far as the specifics go.
And you also heard Mr. Renner's testimony in court, correct?
Yes.
And you were here listening to that?
Yes, but it was several months ago.
It was several months ago, but let me ask you this. Did he say anything in court that you think that's totally contrary to what he said when he was interviewed?
I don't believe so.
Right. And so he essentially, and I'm summarizing here, believed that this was a legitimate process, correct?
Well, that's your words. I don't, again, I would refer to the report specifically about Mr. Renner's opinion of the matter.
Well, did the Attorney General give immunity to someone who believed they were committing a crime?
Would you repeat that?
Sure. The whole point of the immunity given to Mr. Renner was that he believed this was a legitimate process, right?
I don't know what the point of, I don't know what I was involved in the immunity here, okay, I'll just say that. So I'm not involved at that level, okay, so that's why I'm having a difficult time answering your question. As far as what Mr. Renner felt at the time, or, what he testified in court seemed to match the report that I created.
Okay.
I have not had the ability to see the transcripts and see what he said in court. So I'm just putting the two together, okay? As far about, you're trying to summarize what his intent was, I'm gonna refer to my specific notes of what he said specifically rather than, accepting your summarization.
Sure. But I think you said it, and I want to make sure that I'm clear. To your recollection, Mr. Renner's testimony matched what Mr. Renner said in his interview.
Yes.
After Mr. Renner's interview, do you know if Attorney General Nessel was briefed on Mr. Renner's interview and what he said?
Do I know that? I don't know. No.
Who does brief her?
I brief on my updates for my investigation, but beyond that, I can't tell you.
So what does that mean, you brief on your updates to the investigation?
So periodically, I will say I've completed this interview, I've completed that interview. This is what I've done. This is what I have to do.
Is it done in writing that she would have access to, or do you go in and physically meet with her?
It's through a Teams meeting.
Through a Teams meeting? Do you recall if there was a briefing between September 12th, 2023, and when Attorney General Nessel made her statements on September 18th, 2023?
I don't. And I'm not involved, I work for the Criminal Investigation Division, and then we have the Assistant Attorney General Division. So there is a separation there, and we have a chain of command, and so it would be improper for me to, reach out to the Attorney General directly and say, hey, this is what's going on. I always have to go through my supervisor, my immediate supervisor, but if I'm called into a meeting, of course I can provide an update. Again, it's what I've accomplished and what I need to do. In terms of strategizing, that's the attorneys that would handle something like that. I strategize more on the investigation side, and they would strategize on this side. I don't have a jurisdiction.
So you write this report from September 12th, 2023, and then it gets approved by a supervisor? That's SAM?
Yes, that's Sam Miller, who I mentioned earlier.
Okay, Sam Miller. And then you don't know, though, because you have been in briefings with the Attorney General, correct?
Yeah.
Right. You don't know if between September 12th, 2023, when the Renner interview was conducted, and when Dana Nessel, or Attorney General Nessel, makes her statement that the electors genuinely believed in what they were doing, they legitimately believed it on September 18th. You don't know if there was a briefing between September 12th and September 18th.
Again, I would have likely taken place in a briefing, but it would have been only to the extent that I completed the interview.
But the interview would be accessible to Attorney General Nessel, correct?
When I was done with the report, yes.
But what about the audio of the interview?
Yes, that would be accessible.
That would be accessible, correct? Do you know the basis for Attorney General? I'm just trying to figure out if it's coming from you or someone else. Do you know the basis for Attorney General Nessel's statement that the electors genuinely believed that what they were doing was appropriate? Do you know where that came from?
No.
After the statements were made on September 18th, 2023, knowing that this was an ongoing prosecution of electors, and the Attorney General said they genuinely believed it, did you ever speak to a supervisor or anyone about the disconnect between those comments and this prosecution?
No.
Did you ever try to speak to anyone about it?
My supervisor is aware of what I was doing, continuing to pursue the investigation, continuing to gather evidence, continuing to do interviews. And until I'm given an order to redirect or to do something differently, then I keep traveling on that path.
Do you ever raise red flags if you think that a lawyer is doing or saying something that is contrary to, for example, an investigation or prosecution? Sure, because you said you just sort of keep going with the investigation. You have a supervisor.
Right.
And I'm wondering if, regardless of any conflict, you just believe that that's outside of your job duties, or do you think that is a job duty and you've done it before?
So, to speak to conflict, I present the facts and the information. Okay. If there's a conflict that exists, it would that determination would be made above my level. If I felt that somebody was lying as I was interviewing Mr. Renner, and I felt that I've received information that was contrary to what he was saying, then of course I would bring that up to my supervisor. But again, I gather the facts and the information and present them, and then there's a determination about what may be a conflict about my life.
Okay, and would that be Mr. Miller, or would that be another lawyer?
No, that would be above potentially Mr. Miller. I don't know who that person would be or a group of people, but it would likely be, above his level. Again, he's my supervisor, so I'm not intimately familiar with all the duties and responsibilities that he has.
To your knowledge, has anyone discussed in a Teams meeting or anything else the conflict between Attorney General Nessel saying that the electors genuinely believed in the process, in what they were doing, and a prosecution based on intent to defraud? And again, I'm paraphrasing because obviously the complaint is significantly longer, but has that, you understand the conflict I'm raising, has
Sure.
anyone addressed that to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no. It hasn't been with me in a specific meeting.
And not in any email communication, anything that you're aware of?
No.
No additional questions, thank you.
You're welcome.